There's feedbacks between forests and climate. Forests absorb carbon and store it, and then when we harvest them, it gets released back to the atmosphere, and we've been harvesting too much. And I think that this is a consequence. I mean, it's all of the additive and multiplicative effects of fossil fuels and land use clearing and, not treating the environment as our neighbors. And the fires and the beetle kill and all of the forest that is, past a healthy state. And so when you don't, yeah, so I mean, when you don't have forests, you don't have roots, and you don't have the soil isn't nicely glued together, and so it slides. And yeah,
Lots of mudslides.
yes,
Yeah.
lots of people in trouble, which is really heartbreaking too.
Yes. Yeah. And I wondered if you could kind of summarize the Mother Tree Project in a paragraph or a sentence or.
Yeah. Well, the Mother Tree Project grew out of the research that I and my group and my colleagues had been doing for really like 3 decades, 4 decades, 3 decades of observation of what I was seeing was like disconnection in the forest, and then learning about these networks below ground, and then realizing that these old trees were like the nucleus of the forest, that they were the great connectors, and what forestry practices were doing were disconnecting those connections, and through clear cutting and planting practices and weeding practices and so on. And so a lot of that work was driven by the need. What I saw was the need to better understand our forests and how to conserve and protect those connections. And in the process of doing that, learning that trees communicate, and they have societies, and they know each other, and they respond and perceive each other, and like they have so many social qualities like our own. And so that knowing that, I thought, how can we use this beautiful information? And so I started the Mother Tree Project in 2015. We got a grant. Eva was the first person that I hired, along with 3 other young women, and we sort of bumbled around at first, but the idea was to set up ways to conserve these old trees. How do we protect them while still being able to log a few trees, try to a more gentle touch to the environment, and what would that do? And then also, like, how can we use this knowledge to help us keep our forests healthy as climate is changing, and helping the forest change as climate changes, because it has to adapt and migrate, and it's got to respond to these changes. And so the Mother Tree Project basically tests different ways to save old mother trees and her kin and her neighbors and her community, um, and um, and how does this affect biodiversity? How does this affect carbon stocks? How does this affect regeneration? How does that affect how we feel about forests? And how does it affect the animals, the mammals, and the fungi, and all the creatures? And so doing it, we did these different harvesting techniques across the climate gradient that goes from hot, dry forests near the border with Canada, with the US, and all the way up to, so from the 49th parallel to the 52nd parallel, which is at the very northern tip of the distribution of Douglas fir, which is kind of our model, our experimental forest type. So we've set up I think there's 9 climate locations with all these treatments being applied, and then we're monitoring them. And while we planted them, we planted all these different trees, like different species, but in Douglas fir, different genotypes of Douglas fir. So seed that had come from warmer climates, like imagine, bringing seed up from Idaho and Washington and just moving it north, and then bringing seed down from the cold into more southerly climate, so that we could understand which kinds of genetic properties were adaptive to sites, helping seedlings establish. So some of the things that we found out, we found out that leaving these old trees actually does keep carbon in the ground and keeps it stored in the trees, that it does protect the mosses and lichens in the forest. It does protect old growth plants like pyrolas and monaceae, and I'm sure that Eva would. These are kind of like old growth dependent plants. We know that there's also we know that there's special birds and bears and that love old growth forests, and so those are protected as well. And we've also figured out that as when we keep these old trees, that they naturally shed their seeds, they naturally regenerate, they know their kin around them. And then when we move these migrants and these kind of these plants that we're trying to move northward to keep up with climate change, that the forest is a really great, when you have a nice whole forest like that that's only slightly disturbed by logging, that these migrants survive. They do like way better when they have these old trees around them. So it's really lovely, right? The forest does respond to us doing, careful things. It regenerates, it rejuvenates. It's got all of its protective elements there. So it's to me it's a big success story, and it demonstrates how we can do things differently.
Wow. I feel your excitement when you speak, and the vibrancy. And I have to say that I really felt that when I was reading your book, that you kept, there's something behind, there's like something that's life-giving to you about your work. It must be, because you just kept smacking up against so many resistances to what you were actually seeing and discovering and finding out.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I just admired that so much.
yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh,
Everything I do is really about it's about the forest. It's about my children. It's about the next generations. It's about my students.
yeah.
It's about people and forests and how do we live together. So I've never stopped, right? It's just been an incredible gift. I guess it's what the creator gave me, was this passion for forests and the ability.
Ah,
I just go with it as much as I possibly can. And yeah, it's exciting. Everything we discover, like what Eva is doing, is like fascinating. That these trees in our own backyard are communicating with each other. The cedars, the tree of life, is completely interwoven from generation to generation. It's an intergenerational species. Like it's interdependent from one generation to the next. That is so exciting. And it should change how we do things.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So is it changing how we do things?
You know, so far, it hasn't.
No.
I think we're kind of, how change is super slow in us as people as well, and as societies, it's even slower, I think, because there's all this, inertia of the relationships have to all kind of fall into a new place. And there's all kinds of resistance to changing relationships, changing people. And in the forest industry, there's not only these relationships, there's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of processes involved that have been entrenched for a long time. And so to change that is really difficult. And I've spent a long time trying to change things, and had marginal success. And what we really need is transformational change. Everybody's saying that now, but it's true. And I think that, as each time we have these climatic disasters, like the heat dome, the fires, now the floods, that the government, who is really in charge of who we vested our confidence in to make the right decisions for the people of Canada, of British Columbia, of all of us, and they haven't been making decisions in our favor. They've been making decisions in the favor of, big corporate interests. And now I think, and people have been saying for a long time, we need to change. This is coming. It's like the floods are going to come. The heat is. This is. I'm not the least bit surprised about what's just happened, and lots of people aren't. Um, and so maybe now, if with, I kind of think like change happens when there's a kind of a disaster, and then people pushing for change, and then things can come together. And I feel like we're at that point, and I feel like we've got the science in place. There's lots of good science, and we just got to keep pushing these really recalcitrant leaders to make those good changes for us. And then once we do that, I feel like the way social systems work, the way our systems work, where ecosystems work, is that change can happen really quickly. And so that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's definitely getting edgy. So,
Yeah.
these little towns that have depended on logging and forestry. And I mean, I really appreciate your background with the logging family, and that it's not like stop all logging. It's like, how do we do it wisely,
Yeah,
right? But when it
exactly.
actually hits home and your home is now underwater, it's like, well, maybe there really is something to this. And,
Hmm.
and maybe that's the level of understanding that we need to wake up. I mean, it's sad, but
Yeah, I think it seems like there's a whole range of kinds of people, right? Like some people kind of know it already, and it's intuitively our responsibility to look after these connections and relationships. And then there's others that just seem to, even if they know it, are able to sort of put it behind them and focus on, I don't know, making too much money. I don't know. I don't understand people completely, but but I think that at these points in time, these really special points which we're at right now, this is a really powerful point in time, even though it's very tragic and sad. But it's also exciting in that if enough people come together in with their hearts and minds and say, okay, we can do this differently, that I think that we can make change happen. I
yeah,
really do.
great. I love that optimism. It's good because it sometimes seems a bit hopeless. Like,
It does.
yeah,
But hope is what we have, right? We have so much hope. And yeah, I think
yeah, we have
hanging
hope.
on to hope is so
All
important.
that work that you've done that is like ready to be implemented, right? So yeah, that was kind of my question. What can ordinary people do? Um,
I think that, there's so many things that ordinary people can do. And I mean, of course, there's the everyday actions that we take. And I think that like what you do and Eva and the ashram, you're already doing all those things. I mean, but you can also, I guess, serve as leaders, thought leaders in society to help other people understand. And how does that happen? I mean, I don't know all the answers, but for example, our MLA, our member of the Legislative Assembly, Brittany Anderson, I think she's yours as well. Um, she totally gets it. She's young, she's smart, she's open to conversations. She's helping, she's working with us on the Argenta face, trying to set it aside and put it into the Brazil wilderness. And I think finding those key people that are open to change and then supporting them, and writing to them and say we support what you're doing. um, I think that's huge. The MLAs respond to their constituents, and they respond to important ones like the ashram, for example. Brittany Anderson knows about the ashram's been there for a long, long time. It's an important, iconic place in the Kootenays. So
it's
it's
another tree.
yeah, it's a mother tree. Exactly. And so it has influences like a mother tree.
Yeah.
So I guess I think people use their power, right? Even though they think they have no power, people have power.
Okay. Yeah, I like the idea of connecting with Brittany. She was going to come and take a look at the forestry work that we're doing, but I mean, it's a hard time to
It's
do
a
it.
hard time, and
Yeah.
she's so busy. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, but it's still important to just write her a note or write her an email, and
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Thank you. That is so practical. It's nice to have something to do.
yes,
Yeah.
it is. It's so important to have something to do, and
Mm.
to get people involved
Yeah.
so that they feel like they have hope, right? Agency in what they're doing, and yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Just a bit of your spark and sparkle and life force. Let's support life and understand how it works. Um, so when I was just rereading your introduction to your book, which, by the way, you're a really good writer.
thank you,
Writing and all
thank
the
you.
details of all the plants and everything. But that idea of being a detective and the curiosity and the wanting to know, like that seems like a real force in your life. And then the being able to actually do it through this science that is so complex, like what Eva is doing and how she describes it to me. And when she was here studying for her PhD candidacy, it's like, oh my gosh, like these words and these grinding up of things and the carbon whatevers and radioactive things and reading your book. It's like, wow. And then just waiting for years and years to see these things grow and grind them up and send them to a lab. And, like the reality of the forest and then the complexity of the science.
Yeah,
It's such an interesting combination to me.
yeah, it is. It is. But then on the other hand, it's like it is a detective novel, right? It's like, okay, what do I look at next? And it seems so intuitive. It's even I think that like learning about it like all at once, seems, oh, it's impossible. It's so complicated. But actually when you do it slowly, little bit by little bit, it's very makes sense that, well, that's the next thing that you would look at, or
Mm.
and then all of the other people who are working on these techniques to and then adopting their techniques and going, oh, we could use molecular genetics to look at
Mhm.
these connections. And so it is complex, but it's very, I don't know, it's very much just like unraveling a mystery novel, and it's really fun. It's actually really fun.
Great. Yeah.
And then trying to live on a time scale of a tree and think like a tree is, uh, I think that it would be great for everybody to think like that, right? And
Yeah. How do we slow ourselves down enough to get that perspective? Yeah.
I think just being out in the forest, like doing what you guys are doing,
Yeah.
working with your forest and being there and taking your people to the forest and showing them the plants and these old trees, and
Yeah.
like that's how people learn. Yeah, it's
Yes. I
exactly.
love that too, of course.
Yeah.
Um, I have, oh yeah, of course, the mentoring question. So you are a mother tree as well to all of these branches of your work that have extended out now. And I just from watching Eva and knowing, and she said, oh yeah, and then Suzanne came out with me and we trekked through this forest and we looked at that experiment. It's like you're not just like some ivory tower person. You're out there. You're out there with your people. And
I think that that's where the great fun is. That's where the magic happens, is when you're working with people, um and students are especially fun because they're curious and open and driven.
yeah, and
Yeah,
passionate, so passionate. I'm
passionate.
in love with the forest. That's what I see with Eva.
Yeah,
But yet
yeah.
still able to do the science as well, which is like what? But
And
yeah,
honestly, there's a huge amount in it for me too, because I have these beautiful relationships with my students, and I get to go out in the forest, which is my home, and it's way more fun to be there, getting my hands dirty with the kids, the students, than sitting in my office and going, oh, yeah, do this next. Yeah, it's not for me.
Well, and then Eva is like she has a crew of like the next young group of people, right? So it is that like kinship thing of going through the
Yeah,
roots.
it is. It's modeled right through our group.
I love it so much. I love that the metaphor of the trees is working in your work. It's
Yeah, thank
so
you.
integrated.
Yeah, that's very sweet of you to say that.
Yeah, it would just occur to me. It's like Suzanne is the mother tree of all of these.
And Eva's going to be a mother tree, or
She
she is a
is.
mother tree.
She is. Yeah,
Yeah.
she is.
Yeah.
Got her own little network happening. And so the other thing I wanted to ask you, because I did read in your book how you don't really like all the so much the publicity, and yet
Yeah.
you come out of yourself in order to do that. And I wondered what it took you
What did it
personally.
take? You know, I mean, so many things, I guess. Just the desire to make things better, I think. And working for years and years, I call it in the trenches, trying to initiate change from inside industry, inside the government, inside academia. None of it really made a difference. It never really moved the needle on what we do on the land, even though the science has developed. Like we've learned so much, but unless we use it, then it's just like I mean, it's useful in that we learn, but there's so much more we can do with that knowledge, and I know that, and I think people are hungry to know it, and so I just thought I've just got to get this out there. I've got to, that was the reason I wrote the book too, is because well, I love to write, but also just because I was so frustrated with the story not getting out there, or when it's told by somebody else, or and it's filtered, and governments do not pick it up. They know about it, but they can ignore it. And so I thought I'm going to write a piece, this book that anybody can read, and they'll learn about the science without having to work at it, just through the storytelling, and then they can take this knowledge and then move with it, and help me, like, or help all of us to motivate change. That
Okay.
was the reason behind writing the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Beautiful. Yeah, and it seems to have really caught fire. Like it captures people's imagination. This
I
idea that
think,
the forest
yeah,
is wise and cooperative and interdependent and
well, it makes sense.
helping each other.
Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? And it's like the timing. I don't know, I think it was the great creator who who made this timing happen, because the book has actually been written for like a couple of years, and then so this is the great, like, unknown, but Trump was in power wreaking havoc, and my book was ready to come out. It was all done, and the publisher said, no, we're going to wait till Trump is out of power,
Mm.
because he sucks all the air out of the room, and it'll all these books will get lost in Trumpism. And she was right, and she held it back, and then the book came out right at the same time that the protests are happening at Fairy Creek, that the heat dome came crashing down on us, that COP26 happened. People are worried about climate change, and then this book came, and it was like, what, it was some sort of magical convergence of all these things, that I think that's why people are looking at the book and going, oh, maybe there's something here that we can do differently. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I hope that that publicity and that public understanding will help make the change, like a beat, so that we could apply the science.
Yeah. Well, what do you think? How do you think that we could keep the ball rolling and keep the momentum up and
Oh, I think that you should do a movie.
do the movie?
I know you are.
Yeah.
You're alive. I mean, that thing that you're talking about, the tipping point, is really
Yeah.
important.
Mhm.
And if we're at that point, and and this material comes up out in a way that people like me who aren't scientists can understand it, and somehow believe in it. To me, it's a huge conceptual shift that that we want to support. We want to support that.
Cool. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, so it's like getting so many people in, and so thank you
Yeah.
for stepping out of your quiet place and
Hmm.
going public and trying a different way.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I think a cool thing is that these mother trees, these old trees, really are, the bootstrap to the next generation. They're, you know, they s- they mm, they birth these seedlings. The seedlings welcome in the other creatures. It is this huge collaborative social network that rejuvenates the forest, just like our societies. And it's easy to grasp when we understand that we've evolved in the same way that these forests have. Right? And so it's easy for us to get this. And then it's easy for us, I think, to see, oh, this is where we kind of got off track here. That it really isn't about just one gaining everything. It's about the whole community being lifted up. And and so I think, yeah, I think if people can grab, I think people grab that because they understand it in our, it's very basic to us. That's how we operate. And so it feels natural. So yeah. So yeah,
Kind of what we
thanks.
hope for. Like
Yeah.
even in
Hmm.
a distorted, dysfunctional in a way society, we
Yeah.
understand that this is the way it should work.
Yeah.
That the mothers do feed the neighbors and that it is warm and helpful.
Yeah.
And I think that model that actually exists
Yeah.
in the forest that we thought just like fighting each other.
Yeah. But
um,
this is the principle of the ashram too, isn't it? It's about bringing people in and helping them to rediscover themselves, or, their how they, I don't know, and say, you belong with us. We all belong together. It's this, I have never been to the ashram, but this is from talking to Eva, and my sister has been there, and talking, I can just see that's what it is about.
yeah,
And that is what the forest is about. It's wired to do this. It's wired to heal itself as a society, just like what you are doing. You're healing people in their, and sending them back out into their society as whole people.
right. And it's because they all already are whole if we just uncovered the understanding, right? It's not
Right.
that we're making them that way. It's like you discovered, your book is discovering the wisdom
Hmm.
of the forest, not
It's already
creating
there.
it. It's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's there.
Yeah.
So that to me is super hopeful. Yeah. I'm sorry, just yeah, in our tradition, I was saying this to Eva that we call like the whole thing Divine Mother.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So the wisdom that the life is Divine Mother. So
Mhm.
worshiping Divine Mother is accepting life. And it's not even, I don't know, like where does nature start and cosmic begin? It's all the same, right?
Mhm. The origin stories.
Yeah.
And it's yeah, and I find it interesting. I've been working a lot with our First Nations people in the
Mm,
last while, and that is also their basic foundation is in the mother earth, the mother hearth, the 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 mother longhouse, that
mhm.
it is about the big mothers that bring up the rest, and of course all the others too, belonging. But it is that concept of the birth, the mother as the
Yeah.
center of all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was brilliant to call your project the Mother Tree. Really,
It,
I think it has so much archetypal value. And whether we had those mothers or not, we believe in them. Yeah.
yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Yes, we all believe in mothers.
Yeah.
You're right. And it's funny, as we're talking about this, when it was actually, I was making a little film with a journalist, and the journalist, his name is Dan McKinney, and we were talking. He was saying, we were doing the film. I wasn't really calling them mother trees, and he says, why don't you call them mother trees? So it was really his idea. And I said, that sounds great. And then the scientist in me said, well, genetically, these trees have mothers and fathers, but that's not what this is about. This is about the mothering of the earth. It's the mothering, the regeneration of the earth. That's what it's about. So mother really does fit, even if scientifically it's
Mother father.
arguably not correct in the Western science world, but that's only Western science, so who cares about that?
Yeah, yeah. So Fairy Creek, did you have anything you're helping them?
Yeah, um, yeah, so I was born in 1960, and in 1990 was when Clayoquot Sound and the protests at Clayoquot Sound happened. And I was in graduate school at that time. And so I didn't partake, wasn't part of the Clayoquot protests. And I always wanted to be part of it because I thought the movement was really important. And then it was like, you know, years and years went by where the creation of the Great Bear Rainforest, which grew out of the Clayoquot protests, seemed to people thought, oh, we've resolved this issue. The war in the woods is over. But really, what all that happened was that it moved. Or we said, oh, we've protected this area, but we really hadn't. And it shifted the logging over to other areas, which are like where we live around Nelson and the rest of the province. And I could see this happening. I was so frustrated and like, this is not good. People need to wake up. And so then when Fairy Creek, when the protest started at Fairy Creek, I thought, oh, thank goodness, right? But here we are, we're down to our last few percent of big old growth forests. And it's like a little late, but it's better late than never. Um, and so, yes, I've been supporting the Fairy Creek forest defenders as much as I can in the media and going there, just giving them moral support and scientific why is it important that Fairy Creek is a very important movement. It's extremely important, and just letting them know as they're in the pouring rain, as the police are brutalizing them, as the Indigenous people are getting thrown on the ground, that just don't give up, because what they're doing it's got world attention. It right at this moment with climate change and COP26, it's so important that the world goes, people do care about this, and we need to you know and I think that it galvanizes people. It galvanizes us to know that we can make a change, and it gives kids hope that that these protests, these movements, they really do matter. Social change is instigated by a lot of movements like this. They really do matter. So anyway, that's why I really have been supportive. I see it as a great moment, a great opportunity for change.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah.
And the thing that just happened in BC with them saying that they're deferring old growth cutting and so on,
Yeah.
believe in that, or what's your assessment?
Yeah. So I actually am working with that group a little bit. I wasn't part of the analysis, but sort of like the historical timeline of that was that when the NDP government came in, and the NDP is, as historically has been sort of like a for the people, more social democratic party, the New Democratic Party. They used to be very much about conservation of environment. The platform this time was about saving old growth forests. It was about not approving more pipelines. It was about not approving Site C dam. It was really about trying to care for our environment. And then they backtracked on all of those promises, but they did strike a team to investigate old growth and what's left. And that team, which was comprised of two fellows, Gary Merkel, who is a First Nation Tahltan man, and Al Gorley, who was on the Forest Practices Board. And they came up with a list of recommendations for saving old growth forests, or for protecting our forests. And they said, look, we have hardly anything left. We need to put a moratorium on logging these forests, and then figure out what to do to have a better, path forward. So we're not, killing ourselves in this process. And so the NDP government got that report with the 14 recommendations, and they sat on it for over a year, trying to, not knowing what to do. Because when you stop logging old growth forests, that means that some people are going to lose their jobs, and that's not good for voters, right? For getting votes. Um, and then, so in the meantime, this little team, Al Gorley and Gary Merkel, said, well, we need to do it. At least we need to figure out what we have left. That's one of the steps. And then when we figure out what we have to left, we've got to put this conservation, the management of these forests back in the hands of the First Nations people. And that was a really good recommendation. That was their number one recommendation. And the reason that they did that, and I think it's well played out around the world, that when you look at where Aboriginal people live and where the hotspots of biodiversity are, they overlap, because Aboriginal people look after their land. They have this world view that we are all connected and we're all one together. And so they map out directly, and so they could see that. And so they said, and we are also going through truth and reconciliation, and we need to, reconcile. We need to, face up to what we've got, and then reconcile, make a better path through history. And so anyway, so the NDP government basically sat on this and didn't do anything because they were worried about jobs. What are we going to do? And so in the meantime, this little group, including one woman who's in Nelson, Rachel Holt, and two other scientists in Smithers, got together and they said, okay, if the government's not going to figure out how much old growth there is left and where it is, we're going to do it. So they got together, just the three of them, pro bono, and just did the analysis by themselves. And so then they took that and they published the analysis in a journal, and then they published a report that they released to the public. And it basically said, we've only got 3% left of these valley bottom big old growth forests left. So then the people went, oh my God, this is terrible. And so then there was a lot of public outcry. And so then the government, after dragging its feet, said, okay, we'll work with these three consultants and we'll make a little team that's going to figure out, how are we going to do this? How are we going to save these old forests? And so it took them about 5 or 6 months, these last 6 months, with their recommendations and saying, this is what we have left. You need to, and really said to the government, we have about 7 million hectares of old growth forest. And Horgan and his cabinet says, well, we can't save all 7 million because it'll throw too many people out of work. And so they sort of whittled it down so that it became like 1/3 of that amount, 2 million hectares or 2.6 million hectares. That is like the best of the best. And they said, okay, we're going to set this aside. And so then, but they said, okay, it's going to be a deferral. It's a deferral. So that means that and the First Nations need to lead the deferrals. So it can't just be like the Ashram can't just say, oh, we're going to see if we can defer the forest around the Ashram. Or Argenta can't just say, the people of Argenta can't just say, we want to defer this little Argenta face. It's got to be led by the nations. So the Sinaiaks, the Tanaha, the Syilx, the Okanagan, all the nations that are overlapping in this area, for example. And so it really, that is where it sits now, is that now the nations have 30 days. They were given 30 days to decide amongst themselves, do we want to defer the logging of these old growth forests, or do we want to not defer them and then we'll just go ahead and it'll get logged? And so that's the process we're in right now. It's not a perfect process at all. And there's all kinds of rocks being thrown, mudslinging, and nations pitted against nations, and it is a great upheaval. But I think that it had to happen because otherwise, in 8 years, there'd be no old growth left at all. We would have just logged it all. So now we're going to go through this painful process of stopping the logging, but the logging won't stop, actually. It's going to be shifted over to the rest of the forest. they're actually not planning to reduce the logging. So it's definitely not a perfect process. It's a step. Yeah.
And that 30 days is like maybe 20 days or something by now, right? And they
Yes.
that wasn't enough time to.
Yes. The reason that they went for 30 days is because they knew, that, a lot of these companies will rush to log the remaining old growth before the 30 days is up, right? So if they made it 90 days, we would lose that much more. So that's why they came up with 30 days. And it seems not fair. And the nations are really upset because they never get consulted on anything, until it's too late, and they don't have time, they don't have capacity. Um, a- and so it is a problem, but on the other hand, it was a compromise, knowing that, and I know that, the industry, like as soon as there's an increase in the market price, or as soon as there's a threat of a park, or as soon as there's a threat of a deferral, they'll just log up to the boundaries. Or they'll log as much as they can first, which is crazy. You'd think that they would have more social responsibility, but they don't. And the reason they don't, I think, is because they've gotten away with it. We've allowed this to happen for a long, long time. And so the law is on their side now because it's been going on for so long.
Oh, boy. Yeah, what a mighty battle.
It is a mighty battle. Exactly. It's a mighty battle.
Yeah, gosh. Well, we want to support you, and thank you for your
Thank
work.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, and thank you for your time today.
Yeah,
Right.
and thank you. Well, thank you for asking these questions. And Eva has been, you know, co trying to coax me over for a couple of years now, and I've always been so busy and I haven't come, but I would love to come and see what you've done, and provide my support to you as well. This is, it's a two-way thing, right? It's a multi-way thing. So I'm very proud that you are actually doing the stuff that you're doing, that you're actually taking these principles and applying them in your forest. That's really, really cool. Okay, goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hawa. As the Haida say, Hawa.
Oh.
Hawa. Bye-bye.